everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking with Mark Tiedemann, science fiction author and also employee of Left Bank Books in St. Louis. So remember, there are actual bookstores still out there. So Mark, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
I was born a poor, no, never won't go there. I've been a published professional since about 1990. I'm a Clarion graduate, and I'm probably, as a friend of mine put it, one of the best science fiction writers you've never heard of. I've got about 12 books out, or published about 12 books. None of them are in print anymore. And I'm moving towards 70 short stories. I started selling short stories again this past year, and there's a story behind that. But and several years ago, I was lucky enough to join the staff of Left Bank Books in St. Louis. Let me be clear, the website is www.left-bank.com. There are 3 Left Bank Books in the United States, one of them in Maine, one of them in Seattle, and we are not at all affiliated with each other. And since the coronavirus has changed our business model, I have actually had to deal with people who put special orders in at one of the other ones and called us to pick them up. Okay. And so I want to be clear about where you can go. We're selling online and over the phone, and we're still in operation. We just have no foot traffic anymore.
So normally, what kind of foot traffic do you receive when it's not a pandemic?
Oh, normally we've got anywhere from 5 to 20 people in the store on any given time of the day. Usually between 5 and 8, we're pretty busy. There are a lot of restaurants right around us, so we get lead over from them. And the weekends are pretty crowded. Normally, I'd say 60 to 70% of our business is walk-in. That's obviously we have no walk-in now, but now it's flipped over on its head, and we're doing a huge amount of online and phone stuff. We're shipping books all over the country, and the public support has been amazing, absolutely amazing. People have really stepped up, and I'm sure a lot of this is not exactly panic buying, but oh my God, we have to support our bookstore, so I'm not going to buy 1 book, I'm going to buy 5. And thank you for everybody. Thank you. It's been amazing. And the bookstore scene in general has been going through some ups and downs. Over the last several years, there has actually been an increase in the number of independent bookstores after the death march of the previous 20, when Amazon started mowing us down, and Barnes and Noble and Borders looked like the monsters we had to compete with, and now Borders is gone and Barnes and Noble is kind of teetering, and Amazon has emerged as the 800-pound gorilla. But independent bookstores have been growing since they've started adopting business models that Amazon can't compete with, which is on-site events, having author appearances, a lot of things of that sort. And the fact of the matter is that you can walk into a bookstore and find somebody and talk to them about books, which you really can't do online with anybody. And that personal touch is irreplaceable. And it also sort of mirrors the experience we've had with electronic books, ebooks, which seem to have plateaued at a certain level, and the market share has seemed to move at all. And when you read the trades and you see what's going on there, it turns out that most people apparently don't really like ebooks as their primary reading material. And there's a significant number of people who will buy an ebook, and if they really like it, they'll go buy the physical book so they can put it on the shelf. So that ceased to be a big issue. That said, you can get ebooks from us. We're a Kobo platform, and we've just in the last year started a platform called Libro FM, which is for audiobooks. So you can find all that information out on the website. I don't deal too much with those.
And I'll put the website down in the description of the this video.
Okay.
So when people come into the store, is there a certain, I don't know, genre people are looking for these days, or has things changed in the kind of books people are asking for from a few years ago? Or
Well, in the last 3 weeks, we have been selling Camus' The Plague, Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11. If we had a copy available, I'm sure we could sell Earth Abides. Prior to that, we were selling a lot of Margaret Atwood because of the TV series. And then, of course, she released a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. But no, in general, we're a full-service bookstore, and we've got a wide range of interests and a lot of overlap between them. So, no, I mean, the first question is somebody says, can you recommend a book? Well, what do you like? And we can go from there. And we're lucky to have people on staff that if I don't know how to answer that question, there's somebody over here, let me take you over to Cliff or Shane or somebody, and they can help you, and vice versa. So, the people that I work with are extremely well-read, and they love what they do, and that kind of enthusiasm is infectious. And we almost never send anybody out of the store unhappy. They've always got something tucked under their arm to go read.
That's great for you and great for them.
Yeah.
So how has selling books has changed since you started working there? Has it?
Not the actual interaction.
But the mix of books on the shelves maybe is not the same?
What I've been seeing from the standpoint of a science fiction writer is that over the last 10 years, as you well know, we've had this kind of artificial divide between what's considered mainstream and the genres for a long, long time, especially with science fiction. But we've got a generation of writers coming online now who grew up with Star Trek, and it's reflected in their work. And that line is dissolving. That wall is starting to go away. I mentioned Emily St. John Mandel. Station 11 is a good science fiction novel, and it's her first SF novel. Of course, she sort of doesn't acknowledge that. Of course, it's not science fiction. Well, I'm sorry. It is, and it's good. If you go back far enough, there have always been people who wrote what we consider just, straight literature, who would occasionally make a stab at science fiction with questionable results. And they've never generally been very good at it because they tend to reinvent the wheel. They don't understand when they have to stop explaining things. And they, without naming any names, the few that I remember reading had a problem with understanding how all of the changes that they're putting forward actually impact people. They tried to keep the human condition the same as it was in any of their other work. And it was really disjointed. But now you've got people, well, Margaret Atwood is the biggie, and Emily St. John Mandel, and Kate Atkinson has written a couple of books that have definite genre influences in them, one of which, I don't know whether to call it a many worlds novel or a fantasy or what, but Life After Life is an amazing tour de force, which it kind of fits into that in-between world between straight science fiction and what Harlan Ellison would have written. It's not fantasy, it's not horror, it's not SF, but it's in that direction. And she did it extraordinarily well. It's about a woman who keeps dying, and then her life starts all over again. And she never remembers her previous lives, except as sort of premonitions that, don't go down that hallway. Maybe I shouldn't go to the market today, whatever. So she keeps starting over, and she lives most of the 20th century that way. So Kate Atkinson has written a novel which is full of 20th century history. She covers most of it with one character in a way that's completely bizarre. And anybody who's grown up reading science fiction or fantasy would have no trouble just, oh yeah, this, she's one of us. And I've been seeing a lot of that. So the conventions, if you will, have eroded, and we're seeing an awful lot of references back and forth. There's a scene, have you read Station 11?
No, I have not.
There is an absolutely loving scene in it where they come upon, the situation is that a virus has swept the world, and about 90% of the population has died, which is not a new idea, but she handles it in a very unique way. But there's a scene where a couple of people stumble upon this house in the woods, which was obviously built as a getaway for somebody fairly well off, and it's escaped being found and pillaged. So everything is still there where it was when the thing happened, and there's Star Trek memorabilia and little things that, oh yeah, and there's this reference to these books, and the bookshelf contains it. This is part of her background. This is what she grew up with, and it's reflected in the work. So I'm finding it just remarkable that this kind of stuff is happening now. And likewise, you're seeing mainstream literary standards or conventions or interests popping up in straight genre fiction when you read some of the new writers. And some of them aren't that new anymore, but they feel new, like N.K. Jemisin. Wow. This is sort of what people of my generation dreamed of seeing written back when we were waiting for the clankiness of some of the old stuff, which we loved dearly, but could you please write better? And that's happening now, and you're seeing an awful lot of that, and some of the new work is just phenomenal. I don't think there's anything anybody has a legitimate complaint about in the quality of the work being produced today.
Okay. So what kind of events do you have at the store when we have stores open?
We have events. We have a full roster of personal appearances by authors, depending on their footprint in the field. They're either in the store, or if they're big enough, there's a variety of places around the city that we can use to 200 or 300 people. Sometimes it's the Ethical Society. Sometimes it's the public library. We do book sales with St. Louis County Library. So, we're flexible. And when we have a really, really big one, there've been a few events we've done out at Chaminade. And that's a huge event. So we're always looking for new venues to partner with. And so they come in, we provide the books, people come out, and we make a very lively evening of it. And in the last few years, we instituted about 2 years ago a science fiction event line called SFF-STL. And we're working with the local science fiction convention, Archon, to raise the profile of personal appearances in the field. And last year, right before Archon, we had the James S.A. Corey, Daniel Abraham, and Ty Frank of The Expanse were in the store. And that was a great event. And of course, we've got a couple of local superstars. Ann Leckie has been at our store a bit, and others have come in, and we will occasionally pair up a writer with somebody to be in conversation with, and those are always popular. And it's kind of hit or miss. Once in a while, we'll get somebody in, and we'll have 3 people show up, and then there are other times we'll get somebody in thinking it's going to be a modest crowd, and we've got to clear out the store because we've suddenly got 100 people in there. But those are always terrific. And what we're doing now, and again, check on the website, there should be a link to this, we're doing virtual events. Things like this, staged as, this is our author event now, so people can chime in, and there's the author presentation and the Q&A. And our event coordinator, Shane, has been corralling these things and managing them quite ably. And I'm sure it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think this might end up being a permanent feature going forward. When the crisis is over and we can start doing regular in-store events, we may be doing some of these virtual events. I've been doing something like this I host the science fiction reading group, big surprise. And a couple of years ago, I got this notion to invite the author in to Skype into the meeting. And that turned out to work quite well. So we've gotten quite a few people. What was the last one that we got right before all of this shut down? Well, we've had Chip Delaney. We're going to be having Michael Swanwick's going to be chiming in. And I'm hoping to get a couple of others lined up. And those have been a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Who else have I got coming up? I'd have to look at my list of titles. I've got too much in my head right now to just remember offhand.
So is that also on the website so people can see?
We haven't been archiving those, but the book clubs are listed on the website. And there are some that are just open. You can join in. We're doing the book clubs in my group now this way. I think some of the other groups are also doing virtual gatherings. And we finally got a Skype group up and running. So I'm hosting those now. We had our first successful meeting the Sunday before last. We talked about Nancy Kress's novel, Beggars in Spain. Mm-hmm. And next month, the May title is William Gibson's new one. And then after that, we're going to do a couple of classics. We're doing Kate Wilhelm's Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang. And later in the year, we'll be doing The Space Merchants by Fred Pohl and C.M. Kornbluth. I try to mix up classics with new stuff. And that seems to be working out pretty well. So I suspect that when the smoke clears and everybody can go back to whatever constitutes normal for them, we're going to have some new ways of doing business and interfacing with the public that won't go away.
Well, that's cool, actually. I mean, when I have a friend who had an online, an email, like book group kind of thing. And one of the people was from Barrow, Alaska, which is, right up there on the Arctic Ocean, the very northernmost point of Alaska or something. So it's not like she can just drive to the bookstore and be part of a group, So you can get more people in and, have more people from around the world to discuss something that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I have one acquaintance of mine that's in San Francisco that wants to join the next one. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that works out. I think this is just amazingly cool that we could do this. Because, I'm 65. So when I was a kid, Worlds of If, analog had just turned into analog from Astounding. And you could go to the corner drugstore and there must have been 15 different science fiction magazines. And the only way you could get in contact with an author was to write a fan letter, and maybe it would get forwarded. And the interconnectedness of all of this, to me, the 12-year-old me is just jumping up and down going, hey, we're doing it.
It's the future.
It's the future, yes. And there was I went to the 1986 Worldcon in Atlanta, and it was at the Peachtree Marriott, which is architecturally an amazing hotel. You walk into the lobby and you can look straight up to the skylight, and all of the floors are in a circle around it. And I was at one panel where a new writer was just going wild about that. She says, we're building the future. Have you seen this hotel? This is right out of a Michael Whalen painting or something like that. And yeah, we are doing it. We don't have flying cars yet, and probably never will. And
We're going to get self-driving cars, so
we are going to get self-driving cars, which, in some level, I can't wait. But we don't have our moon base yet, and there's some other things that we hinged our expectations of the future on that are still quite a ways away. On the other hand, you can walk around with a computer in your pocket, which I think maybe 3 writers since in the 50s predicted was possible. And I have a Powell Anderson story around here, which talked about one of the communications satellites that was working on hard circuits, and they could send 1,000 pieces of discrete information a minute. And of course, there's George O. Smith's Venus Equilateral stories, which was vacuum tubes. And there was a satellite that was supposed to manage the communication between Earth, Venus, and Mars. And you read these things and you laugh at the amount of information, but they really had no idea. They were moving in the right direction, but who could have predicted the microchip?
I think that when you look at the movies in the 50s and stuff where they're looking at the future, and even if the original Star Trek, they seem to have predicted a lot of cool things, tricorders and communicators and, Skype kind of things. But no one seems to have seen the personal computer coming. That even every time you encounter civilization, it's running on a mainframe, right? Even like Fantastic Planet, and they, flip one switch and everything shuts down. But no one seems to have noticed that or predicted that everyone will have their own computer or 2 or 3 or a computer in their pocket or whatever. Everything's still mainframed.
Yeah, because, well, there's a terrific documentary about the computer revolution called Revenge of the Nerds. And part of it was talking about the early days of the microchip, which was used for other things than computing. I mean, Hewlett-Packard had come up with this thing, and they were looking at it to be used for monitoring traffic signals and things of that sort. And one of their employees came up with the idea for a desktop computer. And the boss said, yeah, okay, but what are we going to use it for? And the only thing this poor guy could say, well, your wife could keep her recipes on it. And they said, no. But the uses were what blocked them. They didn't know what would you possibly want to use this for, because we didn't live that way. So, there were actually a couple of science fiction stories that had personal computers. And
overall, it seems to have been kind of a blank spot there. And then we get so used to having all this stuff that when it doesn't work or something happens. Back 20 years ago when I worked at the hospital, one morning you just started hearing the PA system, Dr. Brown, please call your office. Dr. Smith, please, report to wherever. And you're like, we never hear the PA system. And it was because the solar flare had taken out Motorola's satellite. And so until Motorola got somebody else, they leased some, time on somebody else's satellite. So by like 1 PM, then it all died down. But it's like, for 6 hours, you just heard this constant Dr. Whoever, please call somebody.
Yeah.
And it's like one solar flare,
One solar flare, yeah.
And suddenly, and that was back in the days of pagers. And then suddenly nobody's pager worked,
Yeah.
So we get really dependent on.
Yeah. But then you and I know that that's not the function of science fiction, is to predict gadgets and,
Right.
It's so much wrong. Yeah, well, you're supposed to get the people right, not the gadgets. And I realized from time to time I'll go back to something that I really enjoyed as a kid, and I'm having 2 reactions to these books. One is, oh my God, this is really kind of And usually those are the books that took pains to describe what it was going to be like. I mean, they're talking about how the cars work and how the technology functioned. And of course that didn't happen. So it got in the way of a lot of the story. And the other kind, which holds up very well, is where the writer was smart enough to not be descriptive. We're just doing this. I'm not going to tell you how.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, some of that turned out to be the case, just not in the way anybody would have thought it would be. You know, we're doing that kind of thing. Heinlein was good at that. He never actually described much of the technology. Once in a while, he'd be on a spaceship and he'd describe something. But as his work progressed, you notice he was describing less and less of that.
Mm-hmm.
And just saying, okay, it's a fact. We don't have to describe how, you know, you wouldn't write a detective story and then take pains to describe how the .38 revolver worked.
Right. Or how the car worked that he drove there. Yeah.
Or how the car worked, or any of that. You just say, yeah, he was shot. Everybody knows what that, or he drove to. And now, of course, that was an outgrowth of the pulp origins, which started in magazines that were just enamored of the technology. Amazing's precursor, and even in Amazing, what Gernsback was trying to do was to highlight the tech. So that was the point of the story, was to describe all this stuff. And it took a good 30 years, I think, to shake that off, where we stopped doing that. And those are the stories that didn't indulge in that hold up, that you can actually read. It is interesting to read Arthur C. Clarke novels now of a certain age, where he didn't exactly make that mistake, but there were certain scientific discoveries that were still in the future about the moon and some of the planets that he didn't know. So it's almost like reading alternate history. And, you know, it moves on from there.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this topic?
Any final thoughts on this topic?
I know we could probably talk all day on it, but
we are living in the age of science fiction reality, and I think that the people who are having Alvin Toffler was right back when he published Future Shock. He has a little section on science fiction, and I've never forgotten the phrase that Future Shock, which I don't think has been as prevalent a thing as he thought it was going to be, was basically this whole estrangement process that people were going to have as the world around them changed. But he said that people who read science fiction regularly would have less problems with that because they had learned the habit of anticipation. And we have anticipated ourselves into reading about the lives we currently live and dealing with it on that level. And now we're talking about all the other aspects of what it means to be human in the genre. And it's just become amazing, amazing stuff. And I think that is still true. I think people should read more science fiction because I think they would be less frightened. I think they would be less easily baffled. That said, I get teased all the time because I'm a computer illiterate. And my angry retort when it gets bad enough is that when I write this stuff, it works right. There are not endless downloads and updates and this and that and the other thing. But I'm not bothered by it. And my final thought of a kind of cautionary note is that we're in the midst of a changing paradigm of civic life. And one of the things that's changing a lot is the nature of how we interact. And if we don't address that in terms of work and employment and what we're going to do with ourselves and just let it happen, we're going to have a lot of people that won't know what to do with themselves because they're not required for keeping things running. They'll have all this free time. Hopefully somebody will make sure that we don't just have a new impoverished class. But read more SF. You know, it may bother you, but it will help you not to be as surprised. And I think surprise is one of the things that handicaps people. They react in shock.
That would be a good topic to tackle in another episode. So, yeah, But thanks for joining us for this episode. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and also the little bell notifications so you know when I put up more videos. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay.